Okay.
Nice.
Yes, nice is right. The nice is right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another fantastic edition of This Road Is Mine, the KARAC HENDRIKS I don't know. What a podcast this is. You know, no one's listening, right? That's a beautiful thing. A couple relatives. But that's okay, because it's just a labor of love for me. It's fun to talk about music with you, especially. So, all right, okay, yeah. So my son Cohen across the table from me here. Today we're going to be talking about Willie Nelson's album Stardust. Shit, I don't even know where to start with this album. Like, it's
because I don't know what
well, I think that's kind of the fun thing for me. It's that's been the fun thing for me to have you around and to try and warp your mind. In my image, but so this isn't an album that I listen to. In fact, I probably haven't listened to this album like start to finish in 20 years, maybe. Like, honestly, it's been a while, but it was such a formative oral experience. Oral, A-U-R-A-L.
Yes, I assume.
Not O-R-A-L.
Hope not.
Hey-oh, yeah. Oral experience for me that I know that somewhere deep in my psyche, it shaped a whole bunch of stuff inside of my consciousness. Like, it's the sound of it alone is it's just drilled in there. And I don't know why. Like, I had no business being a 3-year-old kid listening to this on a Fisher-Price record player.
Yeah.
But there was something about it, and it wasn't his voice. I personally, I think it was the organ. I think it was Booker T's.
Definitely.
Booker T's.
Sounded pretty nice.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah. So let's just maybe back up a bit here. So you know a little bit about Willie Nelson, right?
I don't know. All I know is I'm pretty sure he was the only person to outsmoke Snoop Dogg.
Yeah.
That's all I know.
Yeah, and sadly, that's for Gen X and beyond. That is all he's kind of known for. He is, I was going to say the most unique artist ever, but I'm going to say one of, because that's there. I'm probably forgetting others. He is this weird combination of clearly a singer-songwriter. Like, he is primarily, or was initially known as a songwriter. But he also was an artist, and he is still obviously an artist. But he was pretty weird. So when they talk about outlaws, he doesn't, to me, look like the stereotypical outlaw. But he to me is the outlaw. Like, guys like Waylon Jennings, like there was a series of them in the 70s. There's a whole backstory to that, but they were referred to as quote unquote outlaws because, again, Nashville, as you know, kind of goes through ebbs and flows of being very pop leaning. But every now and then it takes a little bit of a shake up to kind of refresh its, to remind the town of its roots, of its, between Texas and the East with the bluegrass connection, the singer-songwriter element of it, the storytelling aspect, and it never goes away, but it does kind of come in and out of vogue. And so Willie tried the Nashville thing. He came from Texas up to Nashville, and they tried to straighten him out. So if you look at some of his old albums, he has a whole bunch of albums that like up until, I guess, technically 73 is when he really found his stride.
When was his first album?
Like, I want to say 61. Like, it goes way back. Yeah. He was a really unique songwriter and wrote some really big hits. The ones that everyone talks about primarily are the song Crazy that Patsy Cline does. Okay. Crazy Arms. God, did he? No, he didn't write Crazy Arms. What am I doing? I'm sorry. Because there's some overlaps with some of the artists that recorded his songs early too.
Oh, okay.
And Crazy Arms would have been one of them by Farron. But Funny How Time Slips Away, and I'm forgetting another key one. I should really just not. I'm trying to wing this without resorting to the wiki machine. But there's a few elements I want to make sure you hear. That you get, so we're not too far off base.
Yeah, I don't think I could name a Willie Nelson song. He's I remember when he died, though. I think.
No, he's still alive.
Oh, he's still alive. Yeah. Okay, I was wondering
Crazy,
that.
Hey?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know who I'm thinking of. some legend. We were in the house. They were in their 80s for some reason.
Well, Merle Haggard probably.
That might be it. Yeah,
Merle did finally die. They were very, close.
I just remember
musical cousins,
seeing it on Rolling Stone, and one of those country guys.
Yeah, and that's that era of legends. I mean, Willie is his birthday's coming up. I knew I scheduled it around this time. His birthday's April 29th. At least according to Wiki. I used to think it was the 28th for some reason, but anyway, it maybe it is. But.
Is he still recording?
Yeah, so that's the really cool thing about Willie is that his legacy will sadly be he has the braids often, and he's a pot smoker. Yeah, but it wasn't always that way, right? Mm-hmm. So Willie through the 60s was in the ilk of the common country cosmopolitan artists. He was writing great songs, but when they would record him, they didn't know what to do with him because I know I played you some clips of this album here. His vocal phrasing is very odd. Yeah. So his timing, the way he sings from his mouth, he's become a caricature in a way because it's very nasally and but it's the most unique vocal sounds you'll ever hear. So he took his cues from horn players. Okay. So Louis Armstrong is definitely what they often say. I mean, he was a singer too, but his real legacy was his horn playing, right? Yeah. So, the way that jazzers of that era would hit the notes, they'd move ahead of the beat, behind the beat. Willie was heavily influenced by that as a vocalist. So yeah. And then as a guitar player, clearly, I mean, you can hear because it's like the classical guitar sound, right? So Django Reinhardt was a huge influence on him. Okay. He clearly does not play like Django, but that sound and that the trills with the right hand. No one plays like Willie. No one sings like Willie. Yeah. And others have been influenced by his writings. So I don't know if he has a super unique writing style. I don't know if I could say that, but he has written some amazing songs. Yeah. So anyway, as an artist, he's just this all-encompassing thing. But yeah, in the early 70s, he was just really, he was trying to be himself, but still trying to like be successful. And it just didn't work. So he ended up moving back to Texas.
Hey, so he's from Texas then?
He's from Texas, yeah, Abbott, Texas. And so he goes back, and Austin, Texas has always been known as, well, it's the live music capital of the U.S. That's what they'll always say. Okay. That's sort of their tourist slogan. Mm-hmm. But when he went back, he started this live scene. They were always like Austin's slogan is keep Austin, or is it keep Austin weird or something? Okay. Keep Texas weird, right? So the idea is that it is this sort of weird amalgam of you've got Mexican influences, obviously because they're so close, and you've got just that whole singer-songwriter farming thing. There's a long tradition of highly intellectual views and writings
from Texas.
Yes,
yeah. It's funny because I think Texas gets ragged on a lot for being dumb rednecks, but it's not true from what I see.
Arrogant, perhaps at times, because we always call Alberta Texas North because they also had a lot of oil, and we have a lot of oil and gas. And then a lot of it would go out on ports to through the Gulf of Mexico there, right? So they would they always had good access to world markets through Texas. I mean, there's clearly a lot of ignorance through there. It would fall into that, the quote unquote the South, but like we always talk about, just because they may have opinions that are different than ours and perhaps aren't as worldly or as woke, doesn't mean they're stupid. But Texas has been able to nurture a very strong, healthy art scene, and a lot of that takes place in Austin. So when Willie went back to Texas, he started to discover himself, basically. I think he basically started letting his hair grow really long, and he was just kind of making this weird music. So he created like the Willie and Family Band. His sister Bobby, still, as far as I know, still alive, still plays piano for him. Also, a guy named Mickey Raphael is the harmonica player. So when you hear Willie, like how Springsteen has Clarence, you'll see Willie and then you'll see Mickey. So Mickey is this seamlessly unaging guy. Like he's a Jewish dude, you know, he's got the whole Jew fro, the curly hair, just a monster harmonica player. And I hate harmonica, but he's really the only guy that should play it.
Yeah.
He's so good at it, and he's got his own unique style. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's a key part of the Willie sound. So he created this vibe, you know, and he would sing about his band members, like his drummer is Paul. You know, like he'd sing about, he has an album and a song called Me and Paul. Like, so the band thing was very important to him. But it was his vision and his drive and direction and his songs ultimately. But around that time in the early to mid 70s, the rock world started to discover the beauty of some of this country music too, and so he was able to align with. He ended up on Atlantic Records, and so that's the label that signed. Obviously, Zeppelin was kind of the big one. They also had a whole bunch of really good soul from the 70s, and if you were on Atlantic, you were clearly. Ahmet Ertegun was the guy that ran Atlantic Records, and he would just champion you. He was like, I believe in you. You do what you need to do. So Willie did 2 records on Atlantic. Shotgun Willie was the first one, and then Faces and Stages. Nice. Yeah, and you'll even see those covers. So, but they didn't do well. But it was that transition period where he was starting to write these albums of kind of concept records, like not operas per se, rock operas or country operas, but they were concept records. So he would do themes where you'd have like this little, let's say a 1 second or a 1 minute like interlude of a song, and then there would be another song, and then he kind of refrain or come back to it, almost like a
musical motif.
Exactly. Yeah,
I love those.
Yeah, sadly but true. That's exactly what it was. Yeah, and he was doing these, and he was telling these stories of not the Old West per se, but just from that perspective of, I guess, of Texas, of to be. If you think of the archetypal male in a lot of our books and stories through the 20th century, it's Obama and Bruce talked a lot about this on their podcast. But there's the lonely man that comes in and does his due diligence and then leaves. Very very isolated. But yeah, and Willie kind of came from that world too, with a lot of his stories and his writing. So he did a couple albums. For Atlantic, and then ended up getting signed to Columbia. He had been with Liberty for years and years, and then ended up Atlantic for a couple. And then the big turning point for him was in '75. Did an album called Red-Headed Stranger, and it's a masterpiece. But like a lot of what I call masterpieces, you can see elements of the masterpiece before it gets there. I always say that, like the first 2 Springsteen records. It all came together with Born to Run, but to me, the second album especially, it was there. It was just not quite developed. But Red-Headed Stranger did bring it all together, and he didn't even write the most popular song on the album, which is Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain.
Okay.
But it's an album that you put on, and you have to listen to it either as 2 sides of a cassette or a vinyl, or you just got to sit there and listen to it. And it's not that long, 35-minute record or whatever. And It just tells this story of, because he's a redhead, right? So the Redhead Stranger was I would guess somewhat semi-autobiographical.
I only know him as gray hair.
Well, that's right. Yeah, of course. So. Yeah, but actually, like in this picture here, I'll turn it later. But he's the Redheaded Stranger, and so he kind of ushered in this weird time of the mid '70s. Remember we talked about Townes Van Zandt, also the Texas Connection guy Clark. You'll notice on that cover, you see that painting there. I don't know if you've seen in the bottom left corner. Susanna Clark. So that's Guy Clark's wife. So so Townes and Guy and Susanna all lived together.
Oh yeah,
they were like the original throuple, but it wasn't what you think it is. So basically, it took 2 guys to be the man that Susanna needed. Guy was very brooding, very dark, but very cool. Townes also, very cool, but a little bit more literate and more. He just needed help, and Susanna, basically what they were the couple in a way, in this weird sort of way. But Susanna is a marvelous. Obviously, she was a painter and a songwriter too. She didn't write a lot of songs, but the songs she did write ended up becoming some pretty big hits as well. So she painted that cover. So like that is an iconic cover. Stardust. I mean, like
I
always would have assumed it was just a photo, you know.
Like, yeah, it looks like a photo.
So cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like Stardust kind of.
It totally does. Yeah, as soon as you see it, and I assume I want to think that's Orion's belt there. Like it could be Orion, but I don't actually know.
Actually, I don't know.
Or it could also be maybe one of the dippers. I don't know, but like because when you see the 3 stars, that's
actually
usually
yeah. I think that might be the dipper is the 3. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, here's
the stars.
Funny enough, actually, I do have a CD of Orion the Hunter. We could talk about it, even though I want to stay on topic. But yeah,
a whole other thing.
Well, yeah, my mom actually really wants us to go into that because that's the Missing Boston album that never was. But anyway, the 3 dots or the 3 stars. So anyway, another iconic album cover that she did from around that time was an album by Emmylou Harris called Quarter Moon in a 10-Cent Town, and it a very similar kind of a sky.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme then.
And that line is from Susanna Clark's song "Easy from Now On." So Emmylou was the original artist that did it. It's been covered a few times since, but Quarter Moon in a 10-Cent Town. I mean, like lines like that. That's that freaking amazing Texas tradition, right? Like you know, they paint a picture in your head without like hitting you over the head with it. Yeah. So anyway, so there's the connection with that cover as well. But Willie, so once he hit Red Handed Stranger, it was like a 15 to 20 year overnight success, right? All of a sudden, the world just blew up. Oh, who is this guy? You know, he's amazing, and Willie, because he is. If you hear him for the first time and you're like, just like, it's weird, like that singing, the phrasing, the guitar is kind of sometimes out of tune. His guitar is an old Martin, and he calls it Trigger, and it's like it's beat right up, like it's got holes in it. But that's Trigger, like that will be, and it'll be one of the when he dies, it will be one of the most expensive guitars ever sold. Yeah, or the boys might keep it. He has a lot of kids, and he's got boys that play music with him, and they have their own band too. And Lucas Nelson actually, and the Promise of the Real. I've never really listened to their stuff. That seems okay. It's cool. He's proud of them. So anyway, Willie became like from, I always say it's always 7 years. And in this case, it was so from 75 to about 82. Yeah. Willie, you could not get away from Willie. So, and he was busy. So it started with Red-Headed Stranger. He did an album called Sound of My Mind, right? Sound of My Mind. Yeah. And that was kind of a transitional album. He did a few of the songs that he had written for other people. He finally redid them. Did an album called The Troublemaker, which is, it was actually a gospel album. And he wrote, it was also really good. So anything he did, you could tell it was Willie, but it was always a little bit different. He jumped around a lot. So like how a Neil Young would do that. Yeah. Troublemaker, and then Stardust. And this album, for some reason, it should not work, but it does. It is, basically it's an album of standards. So songs that were written in the early 1900s, 20s and 30s, Huggy Carmichael. He was heavily influenced by that music because that was his childhood music ultimately, right? The songs of that era. But he did them his own way. And so he had been living in California at the time, and he was living in the same building as Booker T. Jones. Right?
Nice.
So we've talked about Booker T. a bit.
I was a little not surprised, but
it is a surprise. Nobody expected it.
To see his name on it,
and that's why it works. So, Booker T. obviously one of the most legendary organ players of all time. Booker T and the MGs established. They were on Atlantic, by the way, so they were the Atlantic house band. So I don't know if maybe there was some sort of connection with him there, but I do think it was just coincidence. But I guess Willie was out for a jog on the beach because they were living in LA, on the water, and Booker T's like, hey, I think that's Willie Nelson. So he went and hooked up, and then they just started jamming, and they're like, well, let's do a record. And Willie did have a lot of freedom at this time. The beauty, and so he was having freedom and success. So he could, again, on paper, I'm sure the people at the label are going, oh, okay, Willie, we'll put this out. And it became one of the biggest selling records of the 70s. That's cool. Maybe of all time. I'm not sure. I don't actually know what the stats are on it. But so the copy we have here, this came from vinylmeplease.com. This is a double vinyl version. So it was originally just a single record, but this is a half speed mastered. So it's at 45 RPM. So you actually have to play it at 45 and that way you can get a little bit more bottom end, just a more clarity. 45, because it spins faster, there's more room between the grooves to fill in the appropriate space or whatever. But it's just a who's who, or like if you look at the list of songs there, and he used his band, obviously. I mean, like, yeah, Paul Angus's drums, like, it's cool. I don't know. It's just, I can't even explain it.
It was very, like, we were listening to Georgia on My Mind.
Yeah.
Which was cool, actually.
Of course, yeah.
It was really cool. And yeah, I noticed the drums weren't there really to keep the rhythm. It was more of just there. Like,
exactly.
He would just kind of play a rhythm or a clave.
Clave. Yes.
A rhythmic passage.
Yes, as it were.
But yeah, it was literally just
That's
like
exactly
I'm white, so I guess I'll call it a clavet.
Yeah, it's a clavet. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was just like a rhythmic passage that would normally keep the beat, but he'd just like play it once.
Yeah.
And then that was it. Like,
yeah. Well, not unlike how a percussionist would, but you can tell how that would be just probably first or second take. Like they probably just, let's just play these tunes. And a lot of the guys would have known some of these songs because they were old. So at the time, it should not have worked, but it did. And it's, so this album for some reason ended up in my collection. I'll have to get the straight goods from Mom at some point on how that all went down. My childhood record collection is, really bizarre.
Yeah.
It really was. I mean, nowadays you could understand where kids would have these weird collections because everything's available. But back then, I had like another Willie Nelson record, like it was a reissue. Because once he started having some success after Red Headed Stranger, then the old label started like reissuing stuff that either he had recorded and not released, or re-released stuff that he had recorded. So he was considered part of the outlaw movement, quote unquote. And that's there's a whole connection there because that old label that he was on also had Waylon Jennings and Waylon's wife Jessie Coulter and Tom Paul Glaser. It was one of the biggest selling albums of the 70s too. It was called Wanted the Outlaws, and it had a picture of the four of them, and it looked like an Old West sort of picture. And they basically just took songs that they had already recorded and made this single album compilation.
Yeah.
And so that's where the term really started coming around, like the Outlaws. And of course there was a band called The Outlaws too, which
really liked that band.
damn right, that's a whole other thing. That's the Southern rock connection there. But so this was the outlaw movement, quote unquote. And this really changed things. So they only went back to the well as the Booker T and Willie thing a couple more times. The Christmas record came out right after this, and that Booker T also did that. One of my favorite Christmas records called Pretty Paper. Okay. Pretty Paper was a song that Willie had written and recorded way back in the 60s. Christmas, but he's notorious for that. Like a lot of these guys, they re-record their material often.
Yeah. Was it an original Christmas?
Yeah. It was a song.
Cool,
yeah, and that's pretty rare.
It's pretty hard to think of original Christmas songs that aren't like classic ones.
Yeah, very, very few are, right? I mean, you've got the one that Wham did last Christmas, and then you've got Do They Know It's Christmas? So the 80s was sort of like the last round of new Christmas music, and then of course Mariah, basically.
Yeah, that's
she knocked it out of the park.
The only other one I can think of is there's a guy I follow on YouTube called Adam Neely, and he has They did the Shoegazer and you taught me
the Shoegazers,
but with a guy named Shoopser on, and they made, because Adam Neely has a band with a guy named Sean Crawford, and their band is called Sungazer, and then there's a guy named Shoopser on, and they did a collab called Shoegazer, which is obviously, but the guys in Sungazer did a Christmas album in all odd time signatures.
Oh, nice.
And it was like, I haven't listened to it yet, but it was like all in like 15/8, or it's like some weird, something very bizarre. Nice. But I don't know if that was how Christmassy it was. Well, that's like the only other Christmas thing I can think of that's new.
Well, Christmas music is a hard thing because the idea of Christmas is to be very, like looking back, very, lamenting better days, whatever, optimism.
It's all very regurgitated.
Totally.
I don't know.
And the sad thing is, so then artists will try and write new songs, new Christmas songs, and they're okay, but they're never going to have the impact, right? I mean, and really, let's be honest, the Mariah one sounds like it was written and recorded. It sounds like a Phil Spector song from the 60s.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it sounds like a cover for sure.
Right. Yeah. It was totally, and it was intended to be that way. I listened to an interview with the co-writer of that song, the producer of it, and it was intended to be a throwback, right? So that's the only way you can really do that. Your average listener needs to, when they hear something, they need to feel like it's familiar, but not identical, right? So, and that's the key to success.
And I mean, I don't think anyone really cares about like Christmas and what it's actually meant to celebrate.
No, not at all.
It's more of a. I mean, it's important though.
Of course, yeah.
It's a good excuse to see family. So
yeah. Oh,
if you don't.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And even if you're not into, quote unquote Christ, I mean, you should be thinking about the concepts behind it at least, because all religions have the same ideas.
Yeah. There's like the Jewish New Year around that time.
Right.
Which is really cool.
Yeah. Their holidays, their stuff's really cool. Yeah. Definitely.
Cool.
So then in 79, that was a great year for Christmas records, just by coincidence, of course, because I even covered one of them, right? The Paul McCartney one, Wonderful Christmas Time of 79, and the Emmylou Harris album, Light of the Stable, was from 79 as well. Great Christmas record. And the John Denver and the Muppets record, A Christmas Together.
Oh, you have that on vinyl.
I do, and
it's in my collection. I think you put it.
I gave you my original copy.
Yeah,
it's really beat up, but because I replaced it with a copy from vinyl, please, on Miss Piggy Pink. It's a copy. That was just happened to be a great year for Christmas albums, and then of course, like even some that I didn't listen to, like I think Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers had a Christmas album around that time, and it was hugely popular. I never listened to that, but
it seems just like a time for artists to try and capitalize on commercial success.
Well, you have to
put something out, and I mean it makes sense. I think that. Well, isn't that like the American Idol? There was like that American Idol every year. Their winner, just coincidentally, they had the #1 song at Christmas time or something.
Probably,
and then Rage Against the Machine.
Oh yeah,
had that whole thing where they like tried to get a song to #1, and I think they
did.
Actually,
they finally
which was cool.
Bulls on or not Bulls. Killing in the Name. Ended up finally hitting #1,
which is awesome.
Oh, it's brilliant.
It's cool that. I mean, it's kind of funny they use their own song, but at the same time, it's a perfect song. Yeah.
Well, it's a weird time, so and you'll learn about this more as you're in the music industry. But there are annual cycles to the way the industry works, and with the internet and streaming and stuff, things have been disrupted somewhat. But there are still certain things that are still the same, and radio stations basically, like once American Thanksgiving's over, if not a little bit before, they start just playing Christmas music, and not all of them, but some of them like will go like 24/7 Christmas, and then like as soon as Boxing Day comes around, then they flip their format over, and it's a great time for artists to, like for instance, you're kind of catching the last crest of a wave. You can throw a little bit more on the fire, so that made sense. That coming off of a huge album like Stardust, then all of a sudden Willie goes into has a Christmas album.
Yeah.
He also had a children's record, but that was a lot later. No, that's right. That wasn't at that time, but then he started doing some acting as well. There's a movie called The Electric Horseman that he did some of the soundtrack on. He did a version of Midnight Rider by Greg Allman. You don't want to hear it.
Okay.
Not everything Willie does is gold, trust me, but
he has a lot of material.
Yeah, so. Yeah, he's very prolific, and he continues to be.
That's cool. Yeah, because he's got to be in his 80s.
Yeah, 87. Yeah. So it's crazy that he'll be 88 this year. That's cool. Or about this time that this is actually released, I guess. Electric Horseman, and then he did a movie called Honeysuckle Rose. And he was in it too. I've got it on DVD. It's not great, but it's okay. It was kind of cool. And a double album soundtrack. That's actually where On the Road Again came from, was the Honeysuckle.
Oh yeah. Soundtrack. I guess that's that. And he wrote that. Like, is that?
Yeah. That's
okay.
Yeah, and that's like just kind of his iconic song. Right? It became. If you think of one song of his, it would be that one. You know, and then Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain kind of too. But then he didn't write that one, so it's kind of funny. And then 81, he did an album called Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is kind of the sequel to this, but Booker T didn't produce it, so I didn't even really put it on the playlist or want to talk about it. But it's good. I actually have that one on CD because if I recall, it's still not on streaming. He's got a few albums that aren't still available on streaming, and then he kind of hit his maximal like pop music impact in 82. He had an album and a song called Always on My Mind.
Okay,
and that was produced by Chip Smallman, and it had. Obviously, the song Always on My Mind, and his crossing over into the pop world was quite big into the 80s. and he ended up doing like some like duets with Julio Iglesias.
Okay.
Yeah, he was like one of the original kind of Latin pop crooner crossover guys.
Yeah.
Terrible, but yeah. And then his son Enrique was huge in the late '90s. But so yeah, and then Willie kind of capped off a cycle. Like in '83, had an album called Tougher Than Leather, which was it was similar to Red-Headed Stranger, but I don't think it did very well at the time. It's really good though.
Yeah.
And then after that, he did, or even through that time, he started doing duets records. That's the one thing I'm forgetting to mention is in '79 as well. He did a double album with Leon Russell.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it's called One for the Road. It's my dad's favorite, one of his favorite records, and definitely one of mine too. It's a weird one again. It's a double record, a lot of standards. And but it's fun. It's a fun record. It's rare when you put an album on, you can actually hear the fun happening. And Leon was flying high around that time too, but probably on drugs too. Flying on drugs, but yeah, he had sort of hit a kind of another crest of popularity, and he was working with Newgrass Revival as his band at the time.
Nice.
Yeah, really. I mean, Leon's just a whole other story that I still need to learn more of. Hornsby produced an album on him, by the way. It was really cool. And and another Hornsby crossover with this. So there's an album that Willie did in '87 called Islands in the Sea, or Island in the Sea. Hornsby actually wrote the song, and Hornsby and the Range played on it. There's only on one song of the album called Nobody Knows But Me. There's a version of that song live on that Hornsby did on the box set, but not on streaming. And the CD used is like $130. So I could probably find it somewhere, maybe.
That's cool.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. So I still have yet to hear that song. I've heard other songs from that album, but
is it on YouTube?
Probably. Yeah. I should just, maybe I'll rip it off there and throw it in, if I can find it, and throw it into my collection, because, but Booker T did produce, I think, 2 or 3 songs on that album as well. And that was kind of the end of their official collabs, as far as I know. Yeah. They did do one more album together in '83 called Without a Song. I didn't like it as much. I've definitely listened to that one. It's okay. But yeah, the charm of the Stardust album is really hard to identify. It is just considered, like, it'll always be in like the top, at least in the top 500 pop albums of all time. Like, it'll always be referenced because there was a uniqueness to the sounds, to the material. They were doing songs that were, even at that time, coming on 50 years old.
Yeah, yes.
And the sound of Booker T's organ is just like, there's something magical about an organ. I mean, I worked with Mike Little, he's an organ aficionado and master, and they require mastery. Like they demand like to play them properly. They're beasts, and you can chop them, you can emulate them, but like the big wooden machine with the big wooden speaker, the Leslie speaker, like you can't. There's just something about it. It's a very physical instrument, similar to how bass should be played properly. It's a very physical thing. Your hands should hurt when you're done. And drums obviously is the obvious one, because drumming, you can see that it's a physical thing, but bass and organ there's no delicacy going on there. Like, it has to be. It's like you're living through the machine.
They're cool.
Yeah, and so the sound of that Stardust record, like the drone of the organ and stuff, so there's a bit of that church quality to it. But then, of course, you get the Willieisms too, with his nylon string guitar, which he plays through an amp. He's got this really cool. Oh, he's just a trendsetter, right? Like, that's cool. Yeah. Oh, well, and I'm like most things, it was probably out of necessity. I need to hear myself. I'm going to plug it into an amp, even though it's like this bizarre,
It sounds like he kind of just does what he wants and it works.
Yep, totally. And but like most artists, it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
so he did a lot of duets records. Yeah, the Leon Russell one, he did a duets album, famously with Merle Haggard, the Poncho and Lefty record, which written by Townes Van Zandt. Yeah,
forgot about that.
They did a couple more. They did another one in '87, a duets record, and a couple, or at least one later, like not that long ago, maybe within the last 10 years. Django and Jimmy, I think it was called, or something. Yeah. But yeah, and then he would also, like, remember how I think I talked about some of these artists, when they finally hit some success, like Hornsby did, they start to point the spotlight on the people that influenced them and try to give it back a little bit. So he did a duets album with Farron Young, who Farron was one of the first guys to record a Willie song, Hello Walls. Willie also had written that. That was a huge hit for Farron back in like, I think the late 50s, if not early 60s. Okay. So they did a duet song together. And, you know, like he did a cover of all Lefty Frizzell songs too, in 77 called Two Lefty from Willie. So again, showing, you know, that, you know, this is where I come from. This is what I do.
Yeah.
And going through the 80s though, like the 80s really, it took a lot of people down just because of the sounds, like the synthesizers and the drum sounds. A lot of it was pretty garbagey. So Willie didn't really do anything worth listening to until the mid 90s, basically. Yeah. He had an album in 93. There was a song called Still Is Still Moving to Me. I can't remember. Was it Across the Borderline? I think it might have been that album. But and then he started experimenting again, and he had a bit of a second wave coming through the mid 90s into the 2000s. He was able again to sort of find this weird balance of popularity with but still making unique stuff. So he did an album called Titro, which Danielle Lanois produced, so kind of a Tex-Mex but very droning and very, very earthy kind of album. He also had some tax troubles in the 80s, very famously. Yeah. Cool. So he had an album that I think he sold on TV or something. I think you can get it now quite easily. It's called Who Will Buy My Memories. And I think that was an old song he had written, but it's called the IRS tapes. And basically the money that he made from that album and a few other albums ended up going to pay off his back taxes. Basically,
93.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So Willie had some tax troubles in the 80s or whatever. He also started a thing called Farm Aid. In the mid 80s through the Reagan era, there was a lot of concerns about supporting farmers.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about that whole movement, but the best thing to come out of it is there's been a series of concerts since then called Farm Aid. So they do these live shows. The artists come in, like him, John Mellencamp, Neil Young, and might have been one more involved. But yeah, they would just have these big festivals, and then people would show up, pay their tickets, and then they would raise a lot of money for
I wonder what's happening then, because that seems to be a big thing now, at least where we are at. There's a lot of stickers on people's cars about farmers. And that's the best. That's probably a good indicator of political climate at your time, is looking at what stickers are on people's vehicles.
Alberta strong. I love Alberta oil. In the 80s, it was also I love Alberta beef. There was a beef thing. At one point too. Yeah. Well, the whole food, the agricultural sector, like as an industry, there's a lot of considerations there, and I know so little about it, but I do know that it's obviously we need to eat, and we need good food. We need healthy food. The GMO thing gets kind of blown out of proportion, but there are definitely some considerations about farming practices that we're constantly battling with, because there's you need to treat your land properly, but so much of what affects the farming community is climate or the weather, as we call it. And now because our season cycles are so out of whack right now.
It's bizarre.
They're having a lot of difficulty, and our governments, especially the federal government, tends to get involved. And I think there's a lot of resentment, especially out west here, because they don't you don't want keep your government hands off my Medicare, right? But there is elements of I think a lot of decisions are made for farmers, and they're not maybe consulted properly, or it's not working for them. It's more for other people, and so I wouldn't even pretend to know the first thing about that. But so the farm, so even going back to the 80s, Willie was always a part of trying to raise money and advocate for farmers, and that's a big part of his legacy anyway. And then going through the 90s into the 2000s, and now the weed thing really, it's sad because it kind of overtook his legacy a bit. That's
definitely I think, I don't know, did he do something with Snoop Dogg? Obviously they
probably
I think Snoop Dogg has a show and they toke up and stuff. He must have been on that show.
Toby Keith has a song called something about I'll never smoke weed with Willie again, or something because I guess he can just smoke anyone under the table. But he's a typical ginger, he's got a bit of a kind of a mean, not a mean streak, but I think he's got a temper, right? And I think from what I've read, I'm not as well read on Willie as clearly my dad's going to point out plenty of things on this thing that I've got wrong about it, but he does have a few books like autobiographies.
Yeah.
But yeah, like from what I have read, his moods have been pretty. Weed really helps him like kind of chill out. Like I think otherwise, he'd probably be on an antidepressant if he was, in our generations. But he likes it. But he did have to watch. I mean, it's his singing is terrible. He was on the award show last year at some point. It was just terrible. Yeah, it's hard to see him because he is old, but he's getting older now, and he's starting to lose the very things that have made him so unique up until not that long ago. Yeah. But he's been a strong advocate for marijuana. Merle was too, but he just did it a little quieter. Yeah. Merle was a strong advocate for at least decriminalizing it. Of course, the war on drugs in the U.S. has always been a bizarre distraction from reality. And absolutely. So they're working on it, and they're going to have to study it. And it might not be the magic elixir that everyone hopes it is or thinks it is. But, it has worked for a lot of people in a lot of ways, and either as recreational or medicinal. So, and Willie, I think, just kind of treated it as a bit of both. I think he may have gone through a phase of drinking, but it wasn't, clearly he's not an alcoholic like a lot of these artists end up becoming, right? big drunks. So he's been able to kind of keep his wits about him.
Like Justin Moore.
Justin Moore, wow, a drink. Yeah. KMS. Anyway.
Evolution of country music.
Yes. Well, yeah, or has there been an evolution? The de-evolution.
De-evolution, yeah.
Devo, right? That's what it stands for. But anyway, so yeah, then Willie has, but yeah, he through, once he ended up on Universal Records, later in the 90s, he did, I will play you some of it sometime. He did a reggae album.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to say
it's not cool.
No, not
it
cool.
is awful. It is.
Yeah, he seems like someone that would do that.
It's called Countryman, and but it has like the Jamaican colors on the cover,
nice.
And it was a great idea, but it was terrible.
Yeah, so, he seems like the guy that would do that.
Well, and it made sense, right? Because that whole Rasta thing, and it should have maybe worked a little better than it did. But his style of singing and playing it doesn't fit everything, and he's definitely out of time now, a little bit out of time. Yeah. Because in today's recording, since the evolution of digital recording, digital audio workstations, when you've got things locked into a grid, like from a tempo perspective, and you're editing and stuff, a guy like him needs to flow, right? It has to. Things have to move, and it doesn't work when you try and lock him into a grid. And so there's been some stuff. He did a lot of albums through the 2000s, 2010s he started working with a guy named Buddy Cannon, who produces Kenny Chesney's stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, he found a good home there because he could, they would find him some good new material. He probably wrote a few, but a lot of stuff he's been doing now, he's not writing, but and then he also started getting into more of going back to the standards. Like he's done, at least the most recent one, I think, was like a Sinatra album. I think he's done a few like straight songs that Sinatra had made famous.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's still exploring and trying things, but I would imagine we're starting to see him kind of come down the other side of the hill because last time I saw him on that award show, his singing was terrible, and it's sad because
well, he's lived for a long time.
Yeah, so. Coming on 88 years old now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But what a journey, what a legacy. So yeah. He's not one of these artists that I put on a lot, but he made such an impact on me at definitely in my early years. Yeah. That and it's always lived with me, and you cannot help but admire his tenacity. The way he takes risks musically. Yeah. And that sweet spot that his 7 years were life changing for a lot of people, and there's no one like him. The only people that are sort of like him are his kids. If you hear, I guess it'd be Lucas. I think that's the singer in that band or whatever. Sounds like his dad kind of, and it's not like he's trying. Yeah, he's not faking it. Yeah, he's gonna genetically sound like his dad. So. That's cool. And he was good to bring his kids into shows and stuff, like to get them to play in his band and stuff too. But like if you look at the players on that album, they're like that's the key band, right? So like Paul English and Mickey Raphael. Who's a bass player?
Two are listed. There's B. Spears.
Yeah.
Chris Etheridge.
Well, Chris Etheridge, would be. He's more of the pro, I think. I think B. Spears was his touring guy. Yeah.
Robbie Nelson's listed. I assume they're related.
Robbie or Bob?
Or Bobby, yeah.
Yeah, that's his sister, the piano player, yeah. Yeah, really unique stuff. So anyway, Stardust is a just kind of a one of a kind. For a lot of us, I know since it came out, it was our introduction to what you would call standards, right? So the only reason I know the song All of Me is because of Willie Nelson. It has nothing to do with the original version. Yeah. I should probably, but those standards from the from the 30s, 40s, and I'm just even the 20s. Like I don't know, but you see the titles like Moonlight in Vermont. Don't get around much anymore. I know some of that. Like Harry Connick Jr. really started to bring these songs into the public sphere, like through the 80s a bit, and then now Michael Bublé kind of does these standards.
He seems like
he's kind of like the new mad respect for Bublé because he does not fake it. Like some of these guys are like, oh look at it's a revival, it's a throwback. Yeah. No, he's full on. Like
I definitely don't listen to his music. It doesn't speak to me, but I get why people like it
for sure. And I definitely wouldn't recommend it as an introduction to that. But for a lot of people, it is the introduction to this type of music where there was orchestral arrangements and horn charts and what you'd call classic pop, popular music back in the day. Amazing, but no one sounds like Willie. No one ever interprets these songs like that. But it did give a lot of license to taking like standards and like because he's not monkeying with them. Like they're straight up covers for the most part, but just orchestrated with his band and then Booker T producing and involved. It's one of a kind. So
it's cool.
So you've got your own copy of that in your box now too. So when
I'll have to change the speed, like the rotations.
Yeah.
Does that one have a?
It does. They all do. Okay. Yeah. They all have at least 33 and 45, and then sometimes they even have 78.
Okay.
But if you're playing 78s, I mean 78s were they were the original. Well, one of the original formats. Actually, there was a 16 too that went slow, but I don't know what the story is. I got to actually do a little research on that. But you just kick it up to 45 and give it a spin, and it's a beautiful record. And Willie is a treasure. And I mean, I haven't even really dug into much about like his proper albums. I tried to stick around discussion of Stardust and him doing the covers, but he's a legend, and
he's been a household name. I don't know if he is a household name, but it's been a name floating around our household for. I mean, it's just a name I always knew.
No, and that's good. I mean that's the men and the boys, the women and the girls sort of scenario, right? And for good reason. That's why it's so nice that he's not just popular because he had a great record label behind him or whatever. Mm-hmm. In fact, he probably did everything he could to not be a household name, and yet he still is. Because he's just so unique. His physical image too. He looks like equally he doesn't care. Yeah. But it's also like very, very unique too. Like he does his braids, he grows them out, and then at a certain point he cuts them off, sells them for charity. And then he grows them again, cuts them. Yeah, just little things like that. Cool. Like there's just so much about him that, So again, while I don't go to his albums often all the time, it's just he's an example of how to be a popular artist and definitely how to grow old in it too. Yeah. Of course, Springsteen's the ultimate, but he following through this whole. Seeing Willie from a young artist in the late 50s to now, and he's still recording, and like he just dropped an album a few months ago. It's of standards actually. Again, like he's kind of gone back to that. I think it might be a Sinatra related album again, but and then sometimes he'll do an album with just some old or maybe some new songs with a buddy of his. Like he follows his muse, and he's been allowed to do it, but I think he's paid the cost somewhat.
That's nice that he's been given freedom. Even being with labels, that's
for sure.
That's really good.
Yeah, he's a good example of where I think he did also he went through some phases of not having a label too, right? Yeah. So there's actually a really good website. I've got a link to it somewhere where he has so many records that are not actually people don't even really know about. Like he would like, if he just like he did a couple records with his sister, like it was like Willie and Bobby, and you never see them listed anywhere, but and they were like these independent records, and they were around that time, but you know, they were just probably sold at gigs or something. Like he's done a lot of live stuff too, you know.
Yeah, that's cool. That actually kind of we stayed really on topic this one. I kind of tried to make a conscious effort to do that.
But, well, it's easy to for this one. I really think the importance of him is worth staying on.
Yeah. That kind of reminds me that there's a internet phenomenon almost that you could call it that I'm starting to delve into. That's pieces of lost media.
Yes.
And
cool.
It's cool. I've never heard it. At least I've never heard it put that way as lost media, but that's like an actual thing. And that kind of just reminded me of that. But
well, we talked about how the importance of how the media becomes part of the creations too, right? Like synthesizers and turntables, actually, and scratching for hip hop and stuff.
Yeah.
Like in what are they talking about? Like lost medias as like things we used to use and now we don't?
Well, just lost medias and well, it seems to be specifically creations. By people that have just seemingly disappeared. So if there's maybe like a Willie Nelson album that he recorded, but nobody has it or something like that.
Yeah. I don't think he ever fell into any of those traps. Like there would always be some copy of it somewhere, but they're certainly not available to the masses per se.
Yeah.
But I always think of like when you're talking about that, like at least as far as copies, like was it the E.T. game that was one of the worst video games ever created?
Yes, yes, it was buried in a New Mexico landfill.
So, but there are some copies around. Scarcity again, right? For like actual supply and demand scarcity. What was the like when Sex Pistols were signed to A&M for a hot minute, and there were a few copies of at least the God Save the Queen single, if not like their album, their only album they did. But if you can find a copy on A&M Records, like that's like worth like thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars.
That might be a fun episode. Pieces of lost music media. London Drugs has American Idiot now. I went with money. They didn't have it. Now I have no money, and now they have it.
like on vinyl.
Yeah, and I really want to get it.
Double vinyl, under 40 or is it about 40?
30.
Okay, that's
like
not
32,
bad.
Yeah, and I mean, but I didn't realize that there's lost Green Day media between. This is my stray, I guess.
Yeah,
but after Warning, there was American Idiot, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they had Shenanigans and International Super Hits.
The greatest hits,
But for a true album, Warning and then to American Idiot. But there was an album called Cigarettes and Valentines.
Oh, okay.
And that's like one of like the OG pieces of lost media that I was just learning about. But yeah.
Interesting.
So some of the American Idiot B-sides were speculated to be on it, but it's just super cool. Lost media
for sure. Well, and you probably heard about that fire, hey, the Universal Music fire. So there was a big fire. I think it was out in LA. Like, so most of these albums that we're talking about, like, were recorded to tape, like to big reels of tape.
Yeah,
and then they would be stored, and then sometimes they would make duplicates of the tape to use as a to make the vinyls and the CDs or whatever, or put it to digital, but. A lot of times, like, so if some of our favorite artists were in the studio, they would record, 15 songs, but they'd also like maybe try another song, and there'd be like half of a different song that nobody's ever heard.
Yeah.
So then over the years, there's a deluxe edition, and here's a unique song we just found. But there was a big fire. I think it was in the late, like, was it 2008, 2009? Okay. A lot of like what we call masters, like the actual tapes they're gone. Like they're just gone. Like there's no way to get that back now.
Yeah.
But we still don't really know to the extent of what we've lost. Like as in like the fans, right? Because some of that stuff had been digitized and archived or whatever. Some of it hasn't. And so
I mean, for that one, like the guy who owns the studio they were recording in says that. So the Green Day claims that it got stolen.
Yeah.
It was on a hard drive and it got stolen. The guy who owns the studio and runs it said that's not.
Yeah.
The most common understood theory is that they just destroyed it.
Yeah.
But there is there was like a documentary they did, and a lot of that I think ended up on American Idiot. But,
Interesting.
I think that would be a fun topic because it's just so cool to think that if there's someone that you really are interested in their creativity, and to think that they created something that's completely gone, makes it so much more interesting.
It does, especially if you like through following the journey of some of these artists. There can be these missing pieces. Like you hear about them, but and of course, like Bruce had piles of that, right? There was, but we're starting to see the light of day on some of that. Willie, I don't know if he was that prolific. Well, he's been prolific, but I think he just released a lot of it.
Yeah,
and then even through those some of those independent releases or those duets albums that he would do that nobody's ever heard of. Took a lot of research, I think, for some of these guys to find that stuff too. Because when you're not under a contract and nobody's looking for you at a certain point, right? You're old and you're washed up or whatever, so you can just do whatever you want, and then the stuff ends up coming out later or whatever. There's a record label called Light in the Attic Records, which is freaking brilliant because they find the most rarest like.
I think you were showing me that a while ago.
Probably,
some of the albums and like something in Calgary, was it?
The guy. I always forget his name. But,
that's cool.
LaRue or something. Baloo. Yeah. Baloo. Yeah. And it's available on streaming now finally. But like just this random album that somebody recorded and maybe three people heard at the time. And here it is. Yeah. So definitely. Yeah. Media has a lot to play with it. But again, that's why, when an album like Stardust actually, this could have easily been, oh, that's kind of weird. Let's just drop that in the in the cupboard and give us another Redhead Stranger, please, Willie. Which I'm sure the label wanted.
Yeah, probably.
But we got it, and here it is. So, all right. But this is funny. This is the longest episode. This is almost an hour. We're at 57 minutes. So
cool. And
we stayed on topic, and it was an important topic. And I'm sure I got lots of things wrong, but. That's okay. So there will be the accompanying Spotify playlist for those that are listening outside of Spotify, not listening on the Spotify version through Spotify. So you can hit. I put my top 10 Willie Booker T songs on there. Obviously I didn't. I kept it just to the Willie Booker T connection. And then of course anyone that's been listening through. Hi Archer. We've got a cat here. Oh, right at the end. Oh, he just loves the iPad. Yeah. Oh, thanks, buddy. And then,
I wonder if the mic will pick up his purring.
Probably, yeah. Well, give everyone a listen while we're out there. Archer.
There's I actually looked up the world record for the loudest purr in decibels. It's I don't remember. It was from 80 to 100 or something. Just
amazing!
Ridiculously loud.
Yeah. Purrs are an interesting thing, aren't they? Yeah, for sure. But all right, well, thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks, Colin, for putting up with my nonsense, and I hope you enjoy Stardust. And maybe dig into some Booker T while you're at it. One of the most important bands in rock and roll. So.